certainly within the Christian circles that I have walked, people very often will use religious explanations or spiritual explanations for things as a means of externalizing responsibility, as a means of distancing from threat, and as a means of finding other things to blame. And so, yes, I think that people can say, for example, well, we prayed for that person to be healed and they died. Well, clearly the people closest to them just didn't have enough faith. And if they had had the faith to truly declare this, and that's very convenient because it completely avoids the idea that perhaps it was God who had them die. And that the answer was no, they are not going to become well. If a person says, I'm just really stressed in life right now, and I just feel like I'm under demonic attack because I just never can get anything done. My first spiritual exercise with a person like that would be to say, well, let's sit down. Let's get out a piece of 8.5 by 11 paper. Let's just write Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday across the top, and let's write 24 hours down the side. Now, show me when you go to bed and when you get up. Okay, so show me your sleep and show me your various activities. Before I even start, people are usually surprised that I have a 24-hour schedule. Why didn't the schedule just go from, 6 to midnight, right? Well, because there are 24 hours in the day, they're all important. And in my opinion, one of the most important activities is sleep, and it needs to be scheduled. But in any event, I would have them write down their various obligations, etc., and all their responsibilities. And I'd look at them and I'd say, and I've done this with friends, with students, with clients. Of course, I never talk about clients specifically because of confidentiality, but I can say that generically. And I'd look at their piece of paper and I'd say, I don't know why you're complaining. What do you mean? Well, I could find an easy 30 hours here that you could use to get all these things done you want to get done. Where? Well, all you have to do is stop eating and sleeping. And they laugh, ha, 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 ha. To which I then say, isn't that what you've been doing? You haven't been getting good nutrition, good solid meals, healthy meals. You haven't been getting exercise. You haven't been getting sleep in any way that you need it. You've been substituting caffeine and electric lights for sleep. And I would go further. I would tell people that, in my opinion, the key to spiritual formation is a physical thing. It's a solid, good night of sleep. Shoot for 8 to 9 hours every night and see how you feel after a month. And why would that be spiritual formation? I would suggest that you go to Galatians 5:22, read the fruits of the Spirit, and try to find one that isn't significantly hindered by fatigue and by overbooking. The other thing that piece of paper does is it shows people, oh, I was scheduling this activity so close to that one, the only way I could make both meetings is if I could beam up and beam down. They weren't even including commute times. And so all that I'm under spiritual attack was actually, no, you're under self-abuse. Take care of your temple. Because you know what? The scriptures say that we are to present our bodies as a living sacrifice. Well, what's the most effective living sacrifice? The one that lives the longest. How do you live the longest? By taking care of your temple. I don't mean that there won't be times when we'll have a sleepless night or a hard thing that comes up in our life, but those are supposed to be the exceptions, not the lifestyle. And in our culture, it's very often the lifestyle. We call people the movers and the shakers. Do you know why we call them movers and shakers? They only have about 3 drops of blood in their caffeine stream. Of course they're shaking.
Yeah.
And they're moving because they can't sit still.
Yeah. I feel like we're in a time where people do more, maybe have more things that they're doing, but are accomplishing less, thinking less, meditating less, resting less than they ever have before. I noticed it in my own life of just like, just because you're doing a lot doesn't mean you're making any progress.
Very well said. And I would add this. I believe we were created to be dependent upon our Creator. He designed us to need outside references. Neurologically, he designed us that way. Do you know that if you walk into a sphere, like the one in Vegas, if you will, but imagine a sphere just a few feet larger than you, and it's white on the entire inside. And so there's no edges, no corners, no anything. There's just a sphere. And just look up at the sphere. Within moments, you will go blind. The reason is because the rods and cones in our eyes need differences. They need edges to make them fire. We need relativistic change to even see. Because we were designed by a creator who says, let me tell you what the truth is. Let me show you the truth. Depend on me. Let me give you a word that you can hide in your heart. And as far as the rest, we were designed and created for rest. It's not just litigious. Darrell Johnson, who many years ago was the pastor at Glendale Press and became the chair of preaching at Regent and then a pastor of a Baptist, and now he's got his own preachers organization in his retirement years that he's still very active. But I remember 25 years ago him saying, they're not the 10 thou shalt nots. They're the manufacturer's specification for optimal performance. You don't get the owner's manual to your new Lexus and say, what? I can only use this gas? I have to use that oil? These are such exclusionary, rigid rules. No, we say, oh, great. This will help me run the best. Well, here's the deal. Try this. The next time you say, I've got to get this assignment done, and I'm going to push through for 8 solid hours. I'm going to have a Twinkie at noon while I'm working, and I'm going to go through for 8 solid hours. Have somebody else sit next to you and time the amount of time you're actually working. Now, then on another day, have a similar task and say, I have 8 hours to work on this assignment, except this time I want you to take 2 15-minute breaks and a 30-minute break for lunch, on which you eat something and maybe even go for a walk. And I, if I were a betting man, would put money on the fact that the person who takes those breaks will accomplish more, because rest refuels us. Rest refuels us, and it helps us. It helps our mind. Your brain metabolizes 25% of the glucose in your body. It takes a lot of energy. Well, you need to replenish those. And so when God asks us to rest every night and even at other times, it's because it helps us thrive.
Yeah. But it's also like a discipline to rest. Because if you don't rest, and nowadays, because you don't need to rest in a sense, right? Like you said, we have caffeine, we have screens, we have all these things. How do you get to the place where, how do you personally, like with friends, colleagues, whoever you're around, convince them to rest, right? How do you get them to the place where they realize they need it and they see the benefits of that? Because it seems like, for me personally, I can have a lot to do and be like, you know what? Normally I try to take Sunday as a Sabbath. I'm like, I just have too much to do or something like that. And I know what that sounds like. I know that's ridiculous. But how do you talk to somebody like that?
Okay, well, your first question is, how do I convince them? The answer is, I don't and I can't. How do I talk to them? First of all, that piece of paper is very powerful. Because first, when you realize that you've been cutting corners on sleep and food. Second of all, when you realize that you're booking way more. The third thing that schedule shows is there are blank spots on it. So that if you actually have a schedule to your life, and I don't mean a militant schedule, there'll be, here's my schedule, I need to change it here, that's fine. But to have some structure, we do better with structure. But you schedule miscellaneous. You schedule goof off time. You schedule recreation, whereby you imitate the creator by recreating.
Yeah.
Okay. And those are, all of a sudden, self-care becomes a form of worship. But it's still a discipline. Why is it a spiritual discipline? We do spiritual disciplines to combat the parts of ourselves that don't want to work spiritually the way God wants us to work. The parts of ourselves that Adam and Eve listened to when the devil said, you will be God. How much rest does God need? He neither slumbers nor sleeps. How much food does he need? I own the cattle on 1,000 hills. I don't need any of your sacrifices. No, God doesn't need any of those things. You're not God. And so, for example, what if every night before you go to sleep, you say the prayer, Father, thank you for this opportunity to once again declare that you are God and I am not, as I go off to sleep, where I will be completely oblivious to my heart rate, whether it stops or not, my respirations. I will at various times be completely paralyzed in REM sleep, and you will be watching over me. Years and years and years ago, back when people died at home, a little nursery rhyme prayer was written. I'm sure you might have heard it. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. Today, people would go, what an awful thing to teach a 5-year-old. Well, it wasn't so awful when the 5-year-old could come downstairs and grandma was dead, because people died at home. We have taken death and put it in the back hall of a hospital so we can pretend it doesn't exist. And the bottom line is we need spiritual disciplines, because the devil is still whispering in our ear, you don't need rest, you can be like God. You don't need fuel, you can be like God. And the front of our brain knows that's completely illogical, but the back of our brain is a lot less logical and tends to like that language. And so those are some of the things that I might talk about with a friend. But again, the visual of realizing how their schedule is just a disaster can be a helpful thing. And the other thing is to say, could you consider, Sully, if I ever write a book, it would be called Self-Care as Worship. Could you consider self-care as a spiritual discipline? Not, as the church has called it, selfish me time. And people have said absolutely horrible things. One of the expressions that I hate more than any other, you need to learn to waste time with God. God doesn't waste anything. You need to invest time with God and invest time in quiet and rest. That's not a waste.